Good morning. First of all, express my gratitude for giving this opportunity to the Food Congress organizers. What I'm going to talk about is the whole this thing about protein. What is the status, where we are, burst some of the myths about protein, talk about quantity, quality of the protein that we need, and everything that one wants to know about proteins. To start with, usually start with a positive note, but unfortunately the point I want to make is we are born with a genetic disadvantage. And we need to remember that, because that is very important in terms of where we want to go and how we want to maintain our health. This is globally a phenomenon that people, when they talk about Indians, they say we are the thin fat Indians or the slim fat Indians. Why is that? Because this is a comparison. This is called the Y and Y phenomenon. These are two gentlemen. One is a scientist in Israel, and the other one is a Gujarati doctor practicing in Pune. Now, look at their, the gentleman from Israel is about 6 foot 2 inches, very broad shoulders, well built, high, big frame, and his body fat percentage is about 9%. And then, but BMI of both the gentlemen is 22, around, lower than 25. So in that sense, both are healthy. But the body fat percentage of the Indian doctor is 21%. So we are basically a small frame, but our body fat composition is much higher. And most of the Indians tend to have a body fat percentage which is more than 25. Ideally, it should be much less than that. And the other indicator is, of course, your waist has to be half your height minus 2 inches. And none of us really qualify for that, particularly the men. So, apart from that, we are very prone to cardiovascular diseases. We have very high triglycerides. And there is a comparison that was done, a newborn Indian baby versus a newborn European baby. And the parameters indicate that the newborn Indian baby, where we were not even talking of lifestyle and stress and all those problems we talk about. These are newborn babies. And a lot of studies have been done to show that genetically we are at a disadvantage. And that is why we are becoming the capital of cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. So that is the start of the journey. Now, on top of it, we have the triple burden of malnutrition. What is triple burden? We have anemia. More than 50% of the women, and now even more than 30 to 40% of the men are anemic in India. This is across the economic strata, whether it's economically poor or highly rich. This is a statistics. Then at the same time, we are also catching up on the obesity problem globally. More than 20%, particularly when you look at the school kids, more than 20 to 30% of the school kids are already obese. And then we have the stunting and wasting problem. Now, many times when you talk about stunting and wasting problem, people think this is a problem only with economically poor people. Not true. Malnutrition is as prevalent in high economic societies as much as with the poor people. And put all this together, and plus genetic disadvantage, we need to seriously think about how we manage our health. And this we are grappling for decades now. Every manifesto talks about reducing this burden, but if you look at the statistics, significantly things haven't changed. On top of it, unfortunately, the obesity is on the rise, and even anemia is on the rise. There are various reasons for it, but fact is we are still facing the very large burden of this malnutrition. Literally, statistically, if you look at all the newspapers, every day you will find something about being talked about protein. First of all, 73% of the rich urban population is also protein deficient. So it's not about your economic power to buy the food. It's the type of food that we are eating and how our dietary habits are changing. And on top of it, we have the genetic disadvantage, plus our lifestyle is inducing a lot of stress. Now, if you look at all these statistics, the other one says 9 out of 10 Indians lack adequate protein. Now, protein deficiency never gets recognized as a disease or a problem, or there is a clinical diagnosis. You go to a doctor and seek for a solution only when you know there is a problem. And protein deficiency is something that we all have, but we don't recognize that as a problem. So, if you don't recognize it as a problem, you don't seek solutions. There are few things that are happening. One, if you see, by and large, Indians are vegetarians. Why I say that? Technically speaking, you should be eating non-vegetarian food on a daily basis, and a meat forms a larger part of your whole plate. But that's not true with most of the Indians, even those who are called non-vegetarians. The definition of non-vegetarians in India is, I don't mind eating meat or eggs once in a while. That's really the definition. But if you, technically speaking, most Indians are vegetarians, and large part of our protein comes mainly one, the dal. The other one is the dairy products that we eat. But most of the vegetables, rice and other things, yes, rice, wheat has some protein, but I'll come to that why they are not as effective as the other proteins. And so these are the main sources. Now, what has happened in the last 20 years, the consumption of pulses, the lentils or dal as we call, was used to be around 60 grams per person per day. That today has come down to 25 grams per person per day. The reason, one, pulses, people blame the prices, but that's not the only factor why that has happened. We have many other factors. Dietary patterns are changing. For example, we are eating more and more of breads, the pastas, the pizzas and other things, and none of them are made with, they are all made with wheat flour or maida, and none of them have an element of dal in it. And normally when you eat those things, the dal is not an accompaniment with them. Dal is an accompaniment more with the chapatis and the rices that we eat. So as the dietary patterns change, even that is happening. And we are the largest producer of milk in the world today, but our per capita consumption of dairy products is also the lowest in the world. All right. So all these things seem to be contributing as to how our protein, we are protein deficient. On top of it, our protein consumption is going down. So sarcopenia is a major threat to India. I don't know how many of you have heard the word sarcopenia, and how many times even doctors tell you that you have sarcopenia, but it's necessary to identify this one. Basically, it's the complications that arise out of protein deficiency. It's a loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength as a result of aging. But it is a normal thing that as I age, my muscles become weak because my protein digestibility and other things do affect. But fact is, when sarcopenia hits you at an younger age, then there is a problem. Today, I do work with some doctors in Lilavati hospital. 50% of the diabetic patients that come into the clinic are below the age of 20. So diabetes as a disease used to be affecting people after the age of 50 or 60 usually, but nowadays it's you find most of them diabetic patients in the age group of even 10, as low as 10. So not only the number of people having diabetes is increasing, but even people, the age at which this thing has come down significantly. And for every one diabetic that is clinically diagnosed, there are 2 more people who are pre-diabetics and they don't even know that they have diabetes. So there's a huge burden. Now, so what are the solutions for having sarcopenia at a much younger age? Now, you must give a good protein which has a high protein digestibility score, which is measured by a factor called PDCAS. Then some people cannot take high level of protein to start with, and then you will have to look at giving them some kind of hydrolyzed proteins. And for some people, even clinically, in situations where we may have to give directly amino acids, which are the completely broken down units of protein. And there is also what kind of proteins do you need. At different stages, you need different kind of spectrum of amino acids. And then some of them may need specifically branch chain amino acids if you are bodybuilders, and there are specific needs where you have to supplement with it. And mostly when you increase the dietary intake of protein, you need to increase the water intake, and you will also increase the fiber intake, and preferably you should go for a low fat food. So all these things have to accompany when you are trying to increase the protein content in your diet. Some other things, so what are proteins? Basically, we have a set of amino acids. These are like the English alphabets. With the given number of alphabets, you can make millions and millions of words. Similarly, with the given set of amino acids, I can create millions and zillions of proteins. Now, there are two types of proteins that we have in the body. One is structural protein, other one is functional protein. Structural proteins are the ones which will help you build the body. So all your tissues, muscles that you see as a structure of the body, they are all made of structural proteins. Now, when you talk of hormones, enzymes, and lot of activities that happen in the body, most of them are managed, governed, and regulated by what we call as the functional proteins. But all proteins are made by a set of amino acids. Body can produce certain amino acids as the need arises, and there are certain amino acids which body cannot produce, which means for those amino acids you are dependent on the intake of the right food which are rich in those amino acids, which are called the essential amino acids. So there are 20 amino acids identified and are needed for human growth and metabolism. And 12 of these amino acids, particularly 11 in children, are termed as non-essential. Non-essential means body has the capability to make as and when required. But when body has to make them as and when required, it also needs a good source. That means there is some amount of protein that you need to be giving it to your body. Now, the one thing that when common man, when you talk about protein, the first thing that comes to their mind is bodybuilding. But that's not protein is all about. Yes, for a good body structure, you need certain this thing of proteins. But day-to-day activities that are happening in the body are all governed, managed by proteins. So you need, essentially, when you lack protein, you are affecting the entire functioning of the body. And also what happens is, even if I am sitting in the office and doing, I'm not a bodybuilder, I'm not a sportsman, I'm not into heavy physical activities, why do I need extra protein? Even sitting on your chair working in front of the computer, there is a lot of wear and tear of your muscles, and there is a lot of regeneration that is happening. All of them would require on a daily basis protein. And if you don't provide, you are affecting all those functions. And even hair fall is often seen as a problem. And of course, I'm the right person to be talking about hair fall as a problem. Hair fall, again, if you have protein deficiency, that's one of the results. Because hair is also protein. It's made of keratin protein, which is sulfur rich. So if you have a selenium deficiency, and if you are not taking adequate amount of sulfur containing proteins, then hair fall becomes a problem. Even the strength of your nails, how they grow, and the shape of the nails and everything depends on how well your protein intake is. All right. Then muscles, of course, will become, it's not that I need to be a bodybuilder, but I need good muscles to even to do my day-to-day activities, right? So muscle building entirely depends on protein, because the building structure blocks of the muscles are proteins. Then cellular messengers. In the body, when I have a pain, the message goes to brain, and there's a lot of messaging happening because brain controls the body functions, and all these messengers are proteins. Then you have antibodies. When you are exposed to, we get exposed to different bacteria on a daily basis, and body has to produce antibodies to make sure you are protected from these diseases. Otherwise, we will be frequently falling sick, and all these antibodies are nothing but proteins. Then we have cellular construction, this thing in terms of the cell walls and other things, and there are different gates that have to be formed to let certain vitamins, minerals get into your cell, and all these gates and structures of the cell walls are again made of proteins. So and enzymes. When I eat fat, the fat has to be broken down. So the protease enzyme is again this thing, and when I have fat, it has to be, there are lipases. Again, lipases are also all the enzymes, digestive enzymes or any other enzymes, they are all nothing but protein molecules. All right. Then brains, nerve, everything, again your gray mass is again, there is a lot of protein. So proteins are there everywhere, and they are doing all the functions. Now, what is important is your body composition. If I take the total weight of the body, it is composing of water, fat, and muscle mass, and the bone mass. Now, typically, the muscle mass has to be in a certain range. And if you take generally Indians, we are always very weak on the muscle. This thing. This is what I told the Y and Y phenomenon, that we in the total weight, our fat percentage is much larger than what is expected to be a healthy one. So protein should form almost 16% of the total weight of the body. And I think you can go to any clinic and get your body composition analysis. Then you would know how much fat you have in the body and how much this thing you had. That gives you a clear indication. So BMI is not the only one; it's an indicator. But body composition is a more better indicator of the status of your health. And again, what happens when you eat protein? The proteins are first broken down to peptides. Peptides are nothing but smaller pieces of proteins are called peptides. If I further break down the peptides, I get the building blocks, which are called the amino acids. Now, amino acids are utilized for making antibodies, these things, and repairing your muscles and building muscles. So these are the bricks that are used for building all these things. And anything excess left over, it gets converted to energy, and urea is one of the output of it. And that's why, why I said when you take high protein, you will be producing more urea. That means that urea has to be removed from your body. That means I need to pass more urine. That means I need to increase my water intake. So that's the relationship. And then anything excess left is getting converted to glucose and to the fat, and then the fat is stored in your body. Now, is it the quantity of protein eat only this thing? No, it is quality and quantity both. Proteins are digested in your body, and there is something called a digestibility score, and that is an indicator of how good that protein is. Typically, we take egg as a gold standard, which has a PDCAS value of 100. And then if you take the whey protein, which is coming from the milk, that has about 98. So roughly both are around the same. But when you eat soya protein, the soya nuggets or anything, it drastically goes down to almost like 74. And dal typically will be around 50%, whether it's a tur dal or whether it's a moong dal and all, they are in the range of 50 to 55%. And when it comes to wheat contains around 10 to 12% of a protein called gluten. And that's what gives all the interesting properties of bakeries and confectionery that we use for maida and all. But unfortunately, the PDCAS value of wheat is only 30. That means 30% of the protein that I eat comes from wheat, is digested by the body, rest of the 70% is excreted. Right? So you may be eating quantity, but it's not getting assimilated into your body. So both are equally important. All right, then there's a pea protein, and there is a rice protein as well. Now, you can eat it through rice, or there is an isolated rice protein as an ingredient that is also available to you, which you can incorporate into your other food products that you prepare. Now, I talked about the essential amino acids. These are the ones which body cannot make, and there are conditionally essential and there are non-essential. So basically, these have to come from your food products. Now, it's also depending on your age, depending on your activity level, depending on your body weight, you need a different percentage composition of different amino acids. So if you do not supply all that, it doesn't help in any way. It's like having a car with 3 wheels, but the 4th one is not there, you still can't drive the car. So you need to provide all the amino acids. So the best thing to do to make sure that I'm getting the right qualities, eat different proteins, and a combination of proteins. And this is where the traditional Indian food wisdom comes into picture. If you eat rajma by itself, the PDCAS value is around 50. If you eat rice, the PDCAS value is again 50. But when I eat rajma chawal, there is a synergistic effect that happens where the PDCAS value of a rajma chawal goes to as high as 75 to 80. And it's the same principle which is used in making a dosa. Dosa batter contains 70% rice and 30% urad dal. By themselves they are by 50, but when you combine and eat it in the form of a dosa, the PDCAS value of the total protein of urad dal and rice together goes up to 0.8. And there are clinical studies that have been extensively done to prove this point. So it is always a combination of, that's why they say dal, dal chawal, dal roti. It has to be a combination of pulse and cereal. And this is worldwide. If you go to Mexico also, it is rice and beans. Whether you go to bisibele bath in the south or you rajma chawal in the north, it is always this thing of, traditionally what they advise you to is always a combination of proteins. And supplement that with the milk, yogurt and other things. So you kind of, when you combine all these foods, you will tend to get the full spectrum of amino acid that the body requires. Now there is also a, this is what shows the amino acid composition of different kind of proteins that we have. As you can see, for example, cysteine, methionine are the sulfur containing, and they come only from the dairy products. And fish is again a good source, meat is another good source, eggs are good source. There are so number of sources are there, and you need to sort of make a permutation combination. The Indian food is all about diversity. We have multiple ingredients and multiple dishes, and that's probably, this is the richest food tradition you have anywhere in the world. Now if you see the global trends in what is happening in the foods, protein supplements, protein enrichment in your existing foods is one of the top 3 trends. Okay. So people are realizing that we are all falling short of proteins. Now in the normal diet, if you are not getting sufficient proteins, what is the solution? You start eating foods which are supplemented with additional protein. So one of the ingredient that you quite often hear is the whey protein. Now these are some of the protein rich foods. For those who are non-vegetarians, it will be egg, seafood and meat. Then nuts also contain a very high level of proteins. And then spirulina is again another different ingredient which brings in, then there are also some seaweeds which are very rich with proteins. Then you have pulses, soya, quinoa, amaranth, there is rajgira. Then millets also have a high quality of this thing compared to wheat. So always, we are switching from being a millet eating country to a wheat country, and now suddenly there is a gluten allergy and all those phenomena happening. And then cheese, milk, these are other sources. Now protein affordability is a big question. All proteins do not come at the same cost. There is a huge variation in the cost. So when you are talking of protein supplements, the cost of protein also becomes a major issue. And as you can see, the cost of different proteins are completely different. Wheat is low, but also absorption is low. So even if you pay more for the whey protein, absorption being almost 100%, the value realization is more, which is normally not taken into account when you are, consumers are making a choice. But that is something that consumers should be aware of it. If the whey protein containing product is more expensive, it's worth paying that money because you are assimilating more of that protein that is there in the product. Okay, so most commonly used proteins as a food will be again all these things. What is happening as an ingredient? Suppose I am making noodles and I want to enrich noodles with protein. Now I have a choice of proteins that I can add to it. One is the whey, one is the casein. The difference between whey and casein is when you curdle the milk, the paneer, that as we call, is the casein. That's a insoluble protein, and the soluble protein is in the whey, and that you concentrate it, you will get the water soluble whey protein. So that's the difference between whey protein gets digested within half an hour in your body, but casein paneer takes almost 5 hours. So typically if you want to get protein, if you are going to gym in the morning, you should eat paneer in the night. So by the morning, amino acids, they are broken down, and amino acid supply is good in the body. So when you work out in the gym, your muscles are immediately repaired. But if you want to go to gym in the morning and just while going you should always go for whey protein and not casein. So it's also depends on not only the quantity, quality, but when and what kind of protein do you take. That's also equally important. And for people, for faster this thing, for example, if I want a quick release of amino acids in my body, you should go for whey protein. For example, somebody recovering from a surgery, or some of those, or chemotherapy patients and all, they don't have, general systems are weak. There is not enough enzyme production for breaking down the proteins. For them, what doctors recommend is the proteins are hydrolyzed outside and then provided them, and which we call as the protein hydrolysates, or they are also the wording uses protein isolates. And if you go in the market, if you buy a protein supplement which contains protein isolates, it is more expensive, because there is a process by which protein is broken down to peptides, and the manufacturer is giving you directly the peptides, which are more readily absorbed by the body. Okay. As again, within whey powder and within soya bean, there are different grades, because the cost of this depends on what is the protein content and how much has been hydrolyzed. Here you say the whey powder, just the whey powder, the protein could be anywhere between 11 to 14. Then there is a whey concentrate which goes from 25 to 89%. Then there is a whey isolate which is 90 plus protein. And similarly for soya flour will contain 50%. Soya concentrates that are available for bakery applications is 70% protein, while a soya isolate is almost 90 plus is the protein purity. So when you look for protein buying, they come at different prices. The reason is because the purities are very different. And again, some consumer perceptions about protein. Meat is essential to a balanced diet. Men are more likely than women to agree. So these are some of the statistics about what are the myths and what are the beliefs about protein in general. This thing, 70% of the said soya plant-based protein is healthy. It is true, but there are certain disadvantages of the soya protein also. And 57% of them said soya plant-based foods are more expensive than other foods. Yes, as you start enriching food products with protein, because protein comes at a cost, depending on the purity of it, products containing enriched protein will have a slightly higher price, this thing. And 51% of them say, this is the global perceptions. So many of them say that a meal is not complete without a meat, but this cannot be applied to the Indian context. I'll skip some of these things. Also, anything to be effective, there has to be a consumer education. For example, 10 years back, if you go to a common person and ask what is omega 3, probably they would have said, I don't know what is omega 3. But today, if you ask anybody, they may not know chemically what it is or where it comes from, but they all know that there is something called omega 3 that is healthy, and I must be taking omega 3. And people know that fish oil is a good source of omega 3, or a flaxseed is a good source of omega 3. So all this happens because of a certain amount of education that happens. So you want to get a general public out of sarcopenia or a protein deficiency, you need to start educating them about what are proteins, what is the quality of a protein, which are the sources of foods that are protein, and why you should be eating protein enriched fruits. Now, only because of education. So more and more products, if you see, are talking about protein as a claim. It contains so much of protein per serving. I am delivering you 10 grams of protein, or it contains 20% of protein, or if there is a protein supplement, it says 1 scoop gives you 23 grams of protein. So there's a lot of talk about protein, and fortunately all that is leading to a good consumer awareness and education, and people becoming conscious about how much protein I am eating, and if I am short of it, what other changes I should do in my lifestyle to get overcome those deficiencies. So that's an indication of the claims based on protein are on the rise. And I'm just looking at the global trends. It's also now sustainability wise, it is said that beyond 2050, we will not be able to produce meat in a sustainable way at all. That means most human beings will have to depend on vegetable proteins. So textured protein or lab grown meat, you must have heard a lot about it, that they are becoming a reality. There's a lot of venture capital that is going into producing the lab meat, and you will see a lot of those coming, and textured vegetable proteins. In fact, US, there are certain chain of restaurants which say vegetarian restaurant, but when you go and see the menu card, it says chicken leg, fish, something, but all of them are made only with textured vegetable protein. The fish is not a real fish, but is a fish that is reconstructed out of textured protein. It looks, tastes, smells exactly like fish. And then protein supplements, lots of them nowadays. If you go to any of the Bombay suburbs, you will see a lot of more shops selling protein supplements. Bars, powders, smoothies, shakes, these are some of the product formats which will have more proteins. Then pulse-based products. The fastest growing category of pasta in Italy is the pulse pasta. The reason is the wheat pasta has 10% protein, and it is only 30% of it is absorbed by the body. But when I make pasta with pulses, it will contain 25 to 30% protein, and 75% that is absorbed by your body. So this is the fastest growing category in both US as well as Italy. Then Greek yogurt, you must have heard, it has also started coming to India. It's really nothing but a rehashed version of the traditional Indian Shrikhand, which is about 12 to 13% of protein. Now, I won't talk about much of the, I represent Max Protein, Natural India, a company which produces these bars, and my latest speaker, the CEO of the company, Mr. Vijay Uttarwar, will be talking more about these things. And there is also a stall where these products are displayed, so I will just skip some of these things. And thank you for your kind attention. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.